Good morning, Borada. I'm Alison Dutoit, and I'm here to help guide us through the day. Welcome to the Wales Millennium Centre and to the third Cardiff Convention. We have the great pleasure today of spending the day together discussing Cardiff's future and thinking about how this capital city and region can respond to the opportunities and challenges of being a capital city in times of growth and some uncertainty. We're working towards this vision, toward the aim, and I think that we need to practice those components that make up the city that we wish Cardiff to become. So in the last year, Cardiff's starting to put action into delivering a more livable city, recognizing that this requires collaborative practice as well as deliverable projects. Now, finally, and most importantly, it's my pleasure to welcome Councillor Phil Bale, leader of the City of Cardiff Council, and our host for the day, really.
Thank you very much indeed, Alison. And I'm delighted to be working with Alison now. Many of you might know that she's been appointed as the challenge advisor for our new public service board in Cardiff. And I think it's incredibly important for us as we move towards establishing that board and delivering on that vision of livability that we do have that external voice that pushes us to do even more. And I welcome you all here today to the third annual Cardiff Convention. 2 years ago, at the very first one, we were mesmerised by a man who delivered a talk which set the tone for the whole day. Some of you here today may remember Eric Kuhn, and I'm sure if you attended the 2014 convention, you certainly wouldn't have forgotten him. At that conference in 2014, Eric spoke passionately and in vivid colours about cities and their citizens. He told us then that great cities and great buildings need to tell stories. It was something that struck me then, and it stayed with me since. Cities do need to tell stories. Vibrant, exciting, interesting stories. Stories that speak of a place and of people who live there. Stories that hint at a shared future and a common goal. It's a thought well worth investigating, especially today as we gather to discuss the future of Wales's capital city, our own city, Cardiff. And what does the story of Cardiff tell the world? And what future do we want? When I took the role of city leader 2.5 years ago, I set out a vision to make Cardiff Europe's most livable capital city. And I deliberately set out our great capital city against all the great capital cities of Europe because I believe in Cardiff and I believe in its story. A story of a city with a proud industrial heritage, becoming one of the world's greatest seaports, known right across the globe. And I believe in its future. A future which will tell the story of a city which gives its citizens a standard of living and a way of life equal to any European capital. A city which equally values fairness, heritage, and most importantly, a city which values its people. A place where we can all be proud to call home. But now, more than any time, with Brexit looming, radical thinking is needed. A one-size-fits-all economic strategy that is blind to the differences between Cardiff and Carnarvon will prove to be a straitjacket for our Welsh economy. And much is made of devolution to English cities, but I've seen through the UK Core Cities Cabinet that the powers that they've been given do not compare to those already devolved to us here in Wales. And we need to use those devolved freedoms that we have here to push our cities further. Cardiff is currently contributing £70 million annually to the rest of Wales from its business rates, yet the city's infrastructure has been radically underfunded, and this needs to change. Similarly, the City of Cardiff Council also receives the second lowest level of government support of all local authorities in Wales, equivalent to around £150 less per head of the population than the national average. But Cardiff is a success story. It could do so much more, though, for the region and for the country if it was properly funded and nurtured. If we are backed fully, then we can build a capital city of the future in which we can all be proud. Finally, we also know that some of the areas where investment is making a major impact. Currently, £1 billion of a private sector investment is being used to support the development of Central Square, delivering around 1 million square feet of Grade A office space anchored by the new BBC Wales headquarters. The City Council is investing in a new transport interchange to support this, meaning that we can improve connectivity between jobs and the people who need them. Then there is also more investment needed, though, and we know that Cardiff Central train station needs to be improved to cope with peaks in demand and the projected surge in passenger numbers. Despite this underfunding and despite the lack of powers, we still managed to make incredible progress over the past 18 months And the city deal that we've signed earlier this year is testament to this, but it isn't enough on its own. When I spoke here back in 2014, I made the case that we needed to shift from a strategy which focused solely on growing our economy. I argued that we needed a broader approach, focused on fundamentals of what makes living and working in a city like Cardiff great. Education, affordable housing, transport, health, culture, parks, and our green spaces. They all come together to make a great and prosperous city. But this success is built on a bedrock investment in our education, transport, housing, culture, and our green spaces. Education in particular has been the #1 priority for this city. For too long, our school system has been letting the children of this city down. And indeed, it was shameful that in one of Britain's smartest cities, we had a failing school system. But over the past 4 years, we have turned this around, and I pay tribute to everyone in this city that has worked incredibly hard to do just that. Together with the Welsh Government, we are now investing over £160 million in our schools, and more than half of this has been funded by the City Council itself. And this is a massive investment programme which sees us building new secondary and primary schools right across the city. According to the latest EU Urban Audit, and it was mentioned by Alison, the gold standard report on the quality of life in European cities, Cardiff is now ranked the 3rd best capital city for quality of life, up from 6th in 2013. That means 97 out of every 100 Cardiff residents who were interviewed said they were satisfied to live in our city. And it puts us ahead of Stockholm and Copenhagen, and only 2 percentage points behind Oslo, the top-performing European capital. And it's why today's agenda is so relevant. It's an agenda which covers all aspects of city life. How do you make sure we have great schools in this city? How do we help people live healthy lives? How can we get more cars off the road and help people move around Cardiff? And how do we embrace new digital technologies? Today is that conversation about Cardiff. And I want to hear your ideas. On behalf of Eric Kuhn, I want to hear your stories about Cardiff. Stories that will help us harness the energy and passion that exists for this brilliant city. Stories that will tell everyone who hears them what Cardiff stands for. Stories that will help us deliver on making our vision possible of creating Europe's most livable capital city. And I hope you have a brilliant time today, and I look forward to talking to many of you throughout the course of today. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr.
I have to admit, until 2 or 3 years ago, I didn't really know Cardiff very well. And if I tell you that a lot of my experiences were based on going to Cardiff Arms Park, you'll realise how long back you have to go to realise my contact with Cardiff. However, for the last 2 or 3 years, I have been working in Wales, as Alison has said, on both the Schools Challenge Culinary programme and as advocate for the pupil deprivation grant. I must admit, I don't like the term very much. It's one of those things, the deprivation bit. Anyway, we can't change that. But what I have become aware of, I think particularly, is, Cardiff is a great city. But what strikes me always when I come here, it has the potential to be even better. There's something about it, I just feel it's sitting somewhere on the cusp of something, and it could be a great city, or an even greater city. I think it won't surprise you, obviously, that I think that absolutely fundamental and crucial to that happening will be education. I don't think you can have a great city without a great education system. And this takes me on to one of the things that I feel quite passionately about. As I said, I think Cardiff's in a great position. And that is that a certain amount of this can be done in the classroom with better teaching, a better understanding of how children learn, but some of it takes place outside the classroom. And we have to provide that richness of experiences beyond the classroom for all our young people if we want them to be able to have the same opportunities as their more middle-class compatriots in school.
Right, I think it's a bit London heavy today. I was asked to do this quite a long time ago when I just finished up at City Hall. And so people said what we'd be interested in hearing about is some of the experiences that we had in London around livability and public transport. So apologies for the London heavy vibe, but I definitely echo Alistair's point about, these are not exactly we do it so well and here you go. It's more sort of the pros and cons of some of the things that we've done. So hopefully, the fact that Phil and I have been on opposite sides of the political fence in London, it turned out, back in the day, doesn't mean that all these things will be ruled out of hand as potential lessons. So I was going to talk about today 4 basic points. how do we make our cities more livable using transport? So we do need to invest in the backbone. You need public transport that's attractive. Otherwise, the whole idea of getting people out of their cars absolutely doesn't work, and you can do travel demand management till the cows come home. Secondly, in London, 80% of our trips are on the road network. So the idea that our roads are fit for purpose today in this country, or indeed anywhere else in the world really, is not correct. We need to bring our roads into the 21st century. Then I've brought along an example on air pollution, which is a big political topic in London, and I think a lot has been able to be done because of the political pressure that's been brought to bear on the topic. And then fourthly, big topic in London now, how can transport enable housing, regeneration, economic growth? So nobody's interested in transport as transport, really. Sad news for everyone in the transport industry. What people are interested in is what transport can actually help to deliver, and I think there's a lot of interesting read across to Cardiff at the moment and some of the discussions around transport infrastructure in the city. Trip making itself isn't the reason why people will hopefully be interested in the Cardiff Metro or the cycling strategy. It's actually about what kind of city do we want to live in, what are the challenges that we have as a city, and how can transport help deliver against those. And then I've just got some practical things that we found from some of the things that we've done, some of the practical lessons that we learned.
And good morning, everyone. And I also used to be a colleague of Ken Poole, just for those who don't know yet. We worked together in PwC for a while on location strategies, so it's good to be back here in Cardiff. It's been a while, I must admit, but it's always good to be back in cities. I'd like to talk a little bit about global investment, give you a bit of an international perspective on what's happening around the world recently until today, but also try to look forward a little bit, what's going on in the market, how are companies changing their behavior. And it's always a good starting point in terms of investment decision making, because companies make those decisions, not us, basically. Understand what they are doing, where they're going, and what's changing their mindset, and see how that could implicate attractiveness, competitiveness of locations, and particularly zoom in on UK and Cardiff specifically, and see what that means for your proposition. So that's what I'd like to achieve in the time that we have available. Starting off with some data, international data on foreign investment, and these are data that reflect new location decisions by companies setting up a new greenfield operation or expanding an operation somewhere in the world, but it's foreign investment, so it's foreign companies, for example, establishing here in UK. These are data based on new projects that are initiated, that are announced by those companies, and the jobs they create. We try to analyze by job numbers. That's for us the best reflection of the economic impact of an investment into a particular region. Often capital is used for that indication, but we don't think that that's as good as job creation, because capital very often flows to other areas, because a company that sets up a new factory buys equipment and may buy that equipment somewhere completely different than in the location where they invest. So jobs are a better indication, I think.
Good morning, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here today. It's actually my first time in Wales and my first time in Cardiff, of course. So I'm really excited about exploring a little bit later today and tomorrow. So Alison already gave an introduction about me, but I'm an architect by training, actually. So I practiced architecture in the traditional sense for about a couple years before coming back to academia. And so I'm going to start by giving a little background about our lab, and maybe actually answer some questions about what academia or universities can do in cities. So our lab was founded in 2005 as a joint venture between the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT and the Media Lab, which is within the School of Architecture and Planning. And the mission of our lab is really to better understand human behavior in cities. We do this by leveraging advancements in sensor-based technologies, so increased computing power, data visualization, and data analytics techniques. I just want to highlight these 4 points. That cities will continue to thrive. We must make use of existing urban data that's already being generated and stored, but also deploy our own sensor networks in the city. And finally, we need to design intentional human-digital or human-machine interfaces of how we actually interact with these systems in our cities. And I'm going to leave you with this quote and say thank you.
My name is Phil Sheeran. I work at the Motorpoint Arena here in Cardiff. My question was, obviously skills and talent are serious drivers or high priority drivers for investors. But what other drivers influence investors' choices? For example, health and well-being, leisure, entertainment, things like that. Are they important? Are they important influencers when investors are making decisions about where they may go?
Well, the factors that you indicate basically relate to the concept of quality of life, if you living environment issues, and they can play a role. And let me first of all say, in many projects, they are not that relevant in the beginning, but they become more important as you go to final decisions. And it all has to do with the fact that individual people have to make decisions, and then subjective factors start to play a role. So the fact that it's quality of life in a city or in any location is perceived as more attractive than another, at the end of the process is part of the emotional factor that play a role in decision making. But if you look at it objectively, in many projects it's not one of those strategic factors. But there are exemptions, and the ones are that where you need to attract people to the location to come and work for you. I mentioned a couple of examples when you need to attract senior staff for a new R&D center somewhere. You want to be attractive in terms not only your financial package, but also the place where you live and where their family lives, and where the whole family can build a career. All those factors then start to play a role. So education, the city's leisure activities, as you said. But you have to bear in mind it means different things for different people. Now there's a clear difference between senior people and junior people. Junior have different ways of looking at life, want to enjoy it more. That's where factors play a role if you want to attract call centers, for example. For the call center itself, the factors don't mind, but if they want to attract talent to the call center, then those factors become important. So they become part of that decision making. So those are examples when you need to attract people from elsewhere into your location, into your city mostly, then those factors play a role. But if not, if you're fully relying on local workforce, basically, to put it blunt, it doesn't matter because the people live there. So you go and put a factory somewhere, you recruit from the local workforce, the people live there. And you can then make sure that you create a nice environment afterwards, but in your location decision itself, it doesn't really matter so much.
Just looking at sensors, and what impact are you seeing happen on specific cities which you're involved in from whether it's growth in products or commercialization of some of the things which you're showing? What's the impact?
So a couple of the cities that we work with closely, well, one is Singapore. And I think in Singapore, there's a unique situation where because of the government structure, they can actually mandate that companies kind of pool their data together. And so we've been able to do some really interesting work with Singapore where we can actually overlay various data sets, privately generated data sets on top of each other. So for example, looking at just like urban temperature, the temperature in the city as a correlation with energy use of buildings and really visualizing heat island effect in the city, but then also weather data and how that impacts their transportation systems has been another interesting insight. Another thing that we've done with cities is looking at, again, cell phone data and telecommunication data. And then by plotting kind of mobility in the city, we can make recommendations for public transportation systems. So where are people actually travel, like what corridors are they actually traveling through? Where are people aggregating at what times of day? So not only the actual routes for transportation, but also scheduling. When do we have an overflow of people? Your iPhone currently has more computing power than was used to send the first man to space to the moon. So we're generating a lot of data through all the the hundreds of sensors that are on our iPhone, and looking at that is kind of the best quality of information, I guess, that we can pull out on actual human mobility. Cities in Europe that are doing a lot of work with sensors in Amsterdam, in the Netherlands, we've just started a big project with them, and actually they're doing a lot of work with other labs at MIT as well to really push Amsterdam as the next smart city. And then also in Copenhagen, one project we did was looking at all of the bikes or the bicycles that they have there, and how can we leverage that kind of infrastructure into a remote sensing object. So how can we begin to embed let's say, air quality sensors on bicycles and create these real-time updating maps of air quality in the city. And that was something that we did with them, I think maybe like 5 years ago.
Hello, Rebecca Gould, Head of Arts for the British Council in Wales. My question is for Alistair. I previous to this job, I've come home to Cardiff. I worked in London, mainly in London schools, on arts education projects, and I saw that massive change that you talked about from throughout the Blair Brown government of change to schools in London. And a lot of the schools, you know, as you'll know, I worked in had sort of 24 to 30 different languages being spoken, and you know, with the register being done in each one of those languages each day, there was a huge sense of sort of the global world and an understanding of that. And yet still, it seems in the UK, and particularly in Wales, we have some of the lowest take-up for modern foreign languages, and in Cardiff at the British Council, we run the Erasmus Plus programme. And it's still nowhere near, the take-up is still nowhere near some of our European partners on that. What can we do in Cardiff and in Wales to really encourage a more international, global thinking, outlook, aspirations in our schools, do you think?
Yes. I mean, I think the question about modern foreign languages, I think, is one which, I mean, I don't have an answer to at all, and I think it's one of those, you know, the trite answer is that because English is so widely spoken throughout the world, that actually the need to learn other languages barely exists. I mean, you can go on holiday virtually anywhere in the world, apart from, you know, one or two places, and English will get you by. I'm not sure that's in itself is an explanation, but I think it's part of it. I genuinely don't know. I think as a head teacher, I think when we were looking at, you know, at times when we had behaviour issues in school, the behaviour issues were greatest in the modern foreign language classes in the afternoon. I'm not, you know, and I'm not sure why, but our children struggled more with MFL than they did with any other subject. So I'm not quite sure what that is. I do despair slightly about Brexit, because it seems to me that that is a fairly negative reaction towards, you know, how we should be looking at the world. I think in terms of, I think in terms of internationalism, I do think that young people growing up somewhere like Cardiff are incredibly fortunate to be in an environment where there is this diversity increasingly, and in other big cities. I mean, it's not true in all schools, but in some schools there is that. I think one of the big issues that one has in education is that everybody wants what their interest is to be part of the school curriculum. I used to have this thing that when I was driving to work in the morning, every day there would be a problem, and it was down to schools to sort it. It would be obesity, it would be drugs, it would be modern foreign language. And actually, that kind of piecemeal approach to things, we should do more finance education, we should do more of this, more citizenship. Actually, my last point was I think we need a curriculum which is planned much more strategically rather than is aggregated bit by bit. The Finns, who are renowned for their education system, they do have a model which is that every 10 years they revise their curriculum. They start that in about the 6th year of the cycle. They spend 2 years discussing it, thinking what they're going to do, 2 years getting ready to implement it, and then they start again. Now, again, Finland's very different from the UK, but there is a kind of a long-term view of that. I think we don't have that, and I think there are all sorts of things that could be fed into the curriculum, but it needs to be, I think, planned and coordinated rather than just, you know, some Secretary of State or some Cabinet Secretary decides we should do more of this, so we do more of that. It's not the way to do it.
The important thing is that we know that from Copenhagen, it's a sound investment. Copenhagen, through a lot of studies, and you can find a lot of different numbers and figures on this, basically they earn money by laying down bicycling tracks, by getting people to bike, by getting people out of the car and into the bike. So the investment is a drop in the ocean compared to the benefits. The reason they're getting those numbers is because they're tying in healthcare numbers to education numbers, to social services, to fewer days lost in work, people staying in work longer, healthier, living healthier lives, not going into health hospital as often. So the money factor comes from putting all these metrics together, not looking at, ooh, Gail, you want us to spend how much on a cycle track, but hey, Gail, let's talk to the education team and the healthcare team and everybody else and figure out what wins we can get from doing this, which is what we're trying to work toward.
From my experience, younger people are comfortable cycling, even though it's dangerous, and I think that's definitely a big barrier.
Got a great project on portable renewables, lots of underused land in the city. So can you create energy on a site like that whilst it's not being used, but then pack up that system and move it to the next one when you need it? So we've got two flexible solar systems being developed there.
We've got public perception, public understanding, all of those kind of things lead towards a kind of terminology that's used more and more these days, and that's responsible innovation. So our Social Science Research Park is our contribution towards thinking in that space where we would bring many social scientists together that might not usually meet, but also very, very importantly, where they will have opportunity to talk to physical sciences and engineering and life scientists and vice versa.
Generate content from anywhere in the world. There's a lovely story. There's a CEO of Mapfre, who were a sponsor in the last race, and he was giving a talk to 2,500, 3,000 employees, and they patched in live via Inmarsat, one of our key sponsors, the skipper of the Mapfre yacht in the Southern Ocean, and that just was a complete wow. The CEO said afterwards that really that was the ROI for the whole of our investment.
We're focusing on the wide audience and not at all in the traditional sailing audience or the yachty section of the city that might be usually interested in sailing. This is for everyone. It's a big event to go with the family and have a day and maybe go sailing as a guest, maybe not, maybe watch some sailing or just stay on shore and enjoy. There's a lot of things to see.
Okay, I'm going to talk today about health, well-being and design. The first thing is we all have health. The second thing is we all need well-being. And the third thing is if we live in cities, large or small towns, that affects both our health and our well-being, and our health and well-being affects that town as well. So it's quite a complex thing, not difficult to understand. There's not rocket science or brain surgery or anything like that. But it's something that I hope you'll find at the end of this session common sense. What we don't seem to have in this world is any common wisdom to make better places for us all to live in and have better health.
Next year, I think it's going to be my hope that the convention will be able to speak about ways in which these aspects we've looked at today have landed in very real, tangible ways in Cardiff. And we can start to talk about new markers, that because some of these things have been done, now we've changed the dials and we've got a whole different set of ambitions, and we can see, oh, well, that didn't work so well. We know we've got something different. And we can start to see some of that change. There's going to be a report of the day written by Professor Terry Stevens, who's in the back of the room and who chaired last year's event. So he gets to reflect on this year's event, and he's writing that report, which will go to Leader Bale and to the council, to the policy group in the council as well. And we invite all of you and your colleagues who may have had to leave already to feed into that report. So if you have some reflections on the day or comments or thoughts on the day, we invite you to report back, and I'm told that you should write them directly to Councillor Bale, to Leader Bale, and that he can, with his team, parse those, work through those, and get them in through his department. I think there is a spirit of dialogue and listening, and I think there's every intention of acting on what we're saying we want to have happen.